The marble floor of the bathroom felt cold, even through the thick soles of Ethan Cole's Italian leather shoes, a detail that always struck him as absurd given the heated flooring system had cost $18,000 to install. He pushed open the door at 6 in the morning, a bottle of organic formula in one hand, and the weight of another sleepless night pressing against his skull like a vice. The penthouse stretched behind him in shadows and silence, 3,200 square feet of luxury that somehow felt smaller than the 400 square foot studio apartment where he'd raised Lily through her first 3 years. He expected emptiness. Instead, he found a woman. She stood in front of the mirror, dark hair plastered against her shoulders in wet strands, her reflection pale and drawn in the soft glow of the vanity lights. Water dripped from the ends of her hair into the white tile, each drop landing with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the frozen moment. Her clothes clung to her frame, cheap fabric gone transparent in places, and her hands gripped the edge of the marble sink hard enough that her knuckles had gone bloodless. Ethan's breath caught somewhere between his lungs and his throat. The formula bottle slipped from his fingers and hit the floor with a hollow thud that didn't break but rolled, the sound of plastic on marble stretching out like an accusation. The woman's eyes met his in the mirror. They were red-rimmed and swollen, the kind of exhaustion that went deeper than missed sleep, deeper than anything a night's rest could fix. Her lips parted as if to speak, but nothing came out except a small, broken sound that might have been the start of an apology or a prayer. From the bedroom down the hall, Lily's voice cut through the silence with the clarity only a 6-year-old could manage at this ungodly hour. "Daddy, I'm thirsty." The woman's face went white. Not pale, not wan, but actually white, the color draining so fast Ethan thought she might collapse. She spun from the mirror, her wet hair whipping drops of water across the pristine bathroom, and her voice came out in a ragged whisper that barely carried the 3 feet between them. "Please, please don't let her see me like this." The words tumbled over each other, desperation stacked on top of shame, stacked on top of something that looked uncomfortably close to terror. She backed against the glass shower door as if she could somehow disappear into the steam fog panels, her whole body trembling hard enough that Ethan could see it from where he stood frozen in the doorway. "Please," she said again, and the single word carried more weight than seemed possible for 4 letters. Ethan's mind stuttered through possibilities, each one more absurd than the last. Intruder, stalker, someone's idea of a sick joke. His hand moved towards his phone in his pocket, muscle memory from a dozen security briefings about what to do if someone breached the building's systems. But then Lily called again, closer this time, the sound of small feet padding down the hallway. "Daddy, where are you?" The woman's eyes went even wider, if that was possible. Her hands came up in front of her, palms out, fingers splayed in a gesture of surrender that looked practiced, like she'd done this before, like she'd learned that making yourself smaller and less threatening was sometimes the only defense you had. "I'll go," she whispered, her voice so quiet Ethan almost didn't catch the words. "Just give me 10 seconds to get to the service stairs. She doesn't need to see this. Please." Something in the way she said it, the specific phrasing, the care she took to think about what a child should or shouldn't witness, made Ethan hesitate. His hand stopped halfway to his phone. "Daddy!" Lily appeared in the doorway, her blonde hair sticking up in 6 different directions despite the expensive silk pillowcase the nanny had insisted would prevent tangles. She wore her favorite pajamas, the ones with the dinosaurs that Ethan had bought her from Target, back when Target was where he could afford to shop, back before personal shoppers and designer children's boutiques became part of his world. She looked past Ethan, directly at the woman pressed against the shower door, and her mouth formed a small O of surprise. The woman made a sound like something breaking, a sharp intake of breath that came out as half a sound. She slid down the shower door and ended up sitting on the floor, her back against the glass, her knees pulled up to her chest in a posture that made her look impossibly small. Lily tilted her head to one side, studying the stranger with the unfiltered curiosity of someone too young to have learned the social rules about pretending not to notice when things were wrong. She took a step forward, then another, and Ethan found himself moving without thinking, putting himself between his daughter and this woman he didn't know. This person who had somehow gotten into his home, into his private space, into the bathroom where he'd been about to prepare his daughter's morning bottle. "Lily, go back to your room." The words came out harder than he'd intended, sharp with an edge that made Lily's eyes go wide. She'd heard him use his CEO voice before, usually on conference calls when someone was trying to explain why a shipment had been delayed or why numbers didn't add up, but never directed at her. She didn't move. Instead, she looked around him at the woman on the floor and asked with the direct simplicity only children seem capable of, "Why is the lady crying?" The woman buried her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook with the kind of crying that tried to be silent but couldn't quite manage it, the kind that came from a place too deep for quiet. Water still dripped from her hair, darkening the fabric of her clothes where it fell, and Ethan realized with a jolt that she was freezing, actually shivering with cold despite the bathroom's climate control set to a constant 72 degrees. Lily pushed past him before he could stop her. She was small and quick, and she moved with the determination of someone who decided something was wrong and needed fixing. She went straight to the towel warmer beside the shower, the ridiculous luxury item that had come with the penthouse and that Ethan had never quite figured out the purpose of, and pulled down one of the oversized white bath sheets. The towel was bigger than she was. She dragged it across the floor, leaving a trail of disturbed bath mat in her wake, and held it out to the woman with both hands. "You look really cold," Lily said, her voice matter-of-fact in the way that children could be when they saw a problem and a solution and didn't understand why adults made things complicated. "You should dry off so you don't get sick." The woman stared at the towel like it was something precious and fragile, something she didn't deserve to touch. Her hands trembled as she reached for it, and when her fingers closed on the fabric, she clutched it to her chest with a grip that spoke of someone holding on to the only solid thing in a world that had stopped making sense. "Thank you," she whispered, and the words came out broken around the edges. Lily nodded satisfied and turned back to Ethan with a look that said she'd handled the situation and now expected him to do something useful as well. Ethan felt something shift in his chest, a sensation like ice cracking under pressure. He looked at his daughter, 6 years old and already more compassionate than most adults he knew, and then at the woman on his bathroom floor, wrapped in a towel that probably cost more than whatever she was wearing underneath. And he made a decision that the rational part of his brain told him was completely insane. "Lily," he said, his voice gentler this time, "go wait into the kitchen. I need to talk to the lady for a minute." Lily looked like she wanted to argue, but something in his expression must have convinced her. She gave the woman one last concerned look and then padded out of the bathroom, leaving wet footprints on the marble that would dry and disappear within minutes. Ethan waited until he heard his daughter's feet on the hardwood floor of the hallway, heading toward the kitchen at the far end of the penthouse. Then he closed the bathroom door and turned back to the woman who was still sitting on his bathroom floor, still shaking, still holding that towel like it was the only thing keeping her together. His voice came out low and tight, the sound of someone trying very hard to stay calm. "You want to tell me who you are and how you got into my apartment?" Earlier that night, Ethan had stood in a different bathroom in a hotel 6 blocks away, adjusting a bow tie that cost more than he used to make in a week. The mirror in front of him had been similarly expensive, similarly well lit, but the man looking back at him had worn an expression that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. The annual Northwest Tech Coalition charity gala. $1,000 per plate, champagne that came in bottles without price tags, and 200 of the region's wealthiest business leaders pretending to care about causes they'd forget the moment they left the ballroom. Ethan had attended 4 years running, ever since Cole Logistics had grown large enough to warrant an invitation. And every year he felt like an imposter playing dress-up in someone else's life. The tuxedo fit perfectly because it had been tailored to his measurements by a man who'd knelt at his feet with pins and made small humming noises while marking adjustments. The shoes had been handmade in Italy. The watch on his wrist was a Patek Philippe that his CFO had insisted was the minimum acceptable for someone in his position. And yet when Ethan looked in the mirror, he saw the same guy who used to deliver packages in boots with holes in the soles. The same guy who'd once counted quarters to buy diapers. The same guy who'd been fired without warning and left standing in a parking lot with a cardboard box of personal effects and no idea how he was going to feed his infant daughter. The disconnect never got easier. He'd forced himself through the motions, smiled at the right people, made the expected small talk about quarterly projections and market expansion, nodded along when the conversation turned to vacation homes and yacht clubs and other markers of a world he'd never quite learned to navigate comfortably. His table had been near the front, a position that reflected coal logistics' growing prominence in the Pacific Northwest shipping and logistics market, 80 million in annual revenue, 500 employees, 3 warehouses, and a fleet of 200 vehicles. Numbers that should have felt like victory. Instead, they felt like weight. Halfway through the salad course, Richard Pemberton from the board of directors had leaned over with the casual entitlement of old money and made a comment about employee wages that had landed wrong. "You're too soft on the drivers, Ethan. These aren't skilled positions. Anyone with a license can do the job. You don't build a successful company by overpaying for easily replaceable labor." Ethan's fork had stopped halfway to his mouth. He'd set it down carefully, buying himself a moment to choose his words, to remember that he was supposed to be a CEO now, supposed to think in terms of profit margins and shareholder value and operational efficiency. "Those drivers are the reason we have a business," he'd said, keeping his voice level. "They're the ones on the road 12 hours a day, the ones dealing with traffic and weather and impossible delivery windows. Some of them have been with me since the beginning, when it was just me and 2 vans. I'm not going to cut their wages so our margins look better on a spreadsheet." Pemberton had smiled the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "That's admirable, in a folksy sort of way. But sentiment doesn't scale. You want to compete with the big players, you need to start thinking like them. Maximize efficiency, minimize costs. These are basic principles." And the conversation had continued around him, other board members chiming in with variations on the same theme, and Ethan had felt the familiar tension building in his shoulders, the sense of being pulled between the person he'd been and the person everyone expected him to become. He'd excused himself between courses, claiming he needed air, and found his way to a balcony overlooking the Portland skyline. The city stretched out below in patterns of light and shadow, and somewhere in that sprawl were his drivers, his warehouse workers, his dispatchers, all the people whose labor made his success possible. He'd thought about the ones he knew by name, the ones who'd stuck with him through the lean years, who'd believed in coal logistics when it was nothing but a promise and a dream, the ones Pemberton wanted him to treat as line items on a balance sheet. His phone had buzzed with a text from the nanny, "Lily having trouble sleeping and asking for you." Guilt had twisted in his chest. It was almost midnight. He'd kissed Lily goodnight at 7, before she'd even gotten into bed, and now she was awake and asking for him, and he was 6 blocks away, wearing a tuxedo that cost $4,000, and making conversation with people who thought empathy was a weakness. He'd stayed another hour because leaving early would have been noticed, would have been commented on, would have reflected poorly on coal logistics in ways that apparently mattered in this world he'd built, but never quite joined. By the time he'd made it back to the penthouse, it had been almost 2 in the morning. The nanny had left a note saying Lily had finally fallen asleep around 1, and Ethan had stood in his daughter's doorway watching her breathe, feeling like the worst father in the world. He'd changed out of the tuxedo and into jeans and an old sweatshirt, clothes that felt like himself again, and tried to sleep. But sleep wouldn't come, so he'd gotten up to make Lily's morning formula, trying to do at least one useful thing, trying to feel like a parent instead of an ATM machine in designer clothes. That's when he'd opened the bathroom door and found a stranger in his home. Now, standing in that same bathroom with the door closed and the woman still huddled on the floor, Ethan waited for an explanation that made sense. She pulled the towel tighter around her shoulders and took a breath that shook on the way in. "My name is Claire Bennett, and I'm sorry, I know this looks insane. I know I shouldn't be here, but I didn't know where else to go." Her voice was hoarse, like she'd been crying for hours, or maybe like she'd been screaming. Ethan couldn't tell which. He crossed his arms over his chest and stayed where he was, blocking the door without quite meaning to. "That doesn't answer my question. How did you get in?" Claire's eyes dropped to the floor. She seemed to be studying the pattern in the marble, or maybe just looking anywhere that wasn't at him. "The service entrance, the door in the back, the one the building staff uses for deliveries and maintenance. It wasn't locked, not really, it was stuck in the frame, like the latch wasn't catching properly, and I pushed and it opened." Ethan made a mental note to have building security check every entrance point in the morning. The penthouse was supposed to be secure, protected by multiple layers of access control and surveillance. The idea that someone could just walk in because of a faulty latch made his skin crawl. And you decided to what? Break into the first apartment you found and take a shower? The words came out harsher than he'd intended, but Claire didn't flinch. She just pulled the towel even tighter and nodded. I wasn't trying to steal anything. I didn't touch anything except the shower. I was so cold. I've been cold for 3 weeks straight, and I saw the door, and I thought if I could just get warm for a few minutes, just clean for a few minutes, I could think straight again. I could figure out what to do next. 3 weeks. The timeline stuck in Ethan's mind, a detail that felt significant even though he couldn't immediately place why. You're homeless. It wasn't a question. Claire's appearance made it obvious. The layers of cheap clothing gone ragged, the thinness that came from missed meals, the particular kind of exhaustion that settled into someone who had nowhere safe to sleep. But saying it out loud seemed to shift something in the air between them. Claire's jaw tightened. She looked up at him with eyes that held more pride than seemed possible given the circumstances, and when she spoke, her voice carried an edge. I used to have an apartment, a nice one, a maid, a life. Things change. Before Ethan could respond, before he could ask the obvious follow-up questions, Claire's expression shifted. The pride drained out of it, replaced by something that looked like recognition dawning slowly, like puzzle pieces clicking into place. Wait, she said, her voice going quiet. You're the man from the convenience store. Ethan felt his stomach drop. He hadn't made the connection until she said it, but now the memory came rushing back with uncomfortable clarity. 2 weeks ago, maybe closer to 3, a Tuesday morning before work, stopping at the 7-Eleven on his way back from dropping Lily at school. He'd been wearing jeans and an old Cole Logistics polo shirt, clothes he kept for when he wanted to visit the warehouses without looking like corporate management descending from on high. There'd been a woman at the counter counting change with hands that shook slightly, staring at the price tags on granola bars like she was doing complex mathematics in her head. She'd had the look of someone trying to decide between a food and bus fare, a look Ethan recognized from his own past with a clarity that had made his chest tighten. He grabbed a sandwich and a bottle of water from the cooler, walked up to the counter, and handed them to her before his brain could talk him out of it. Everyone has bad days, he'd said, keeping his voice light, trying not to make it feel like charity. Things get better. She tried to refuse, tried to say she was fine, but he'd already handed the clerk a 20 for his own coffee and her items and walked out before she could argue. The whole interaction had taken maybe 90 seconds, and he'd thought about it twice since then. Just another moment in a city full of moments. Just another person struggling to get by. Except now that person was sitting on his bathroom floor. Claire was staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Something between disbelief and something that might have been hope if hope came wrapped in exhaustion and desperation. You gave me a sandwich, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. And water. And you said, she trailed off, her eyes getting bright with unshed tears. You said things get better. And I kept the wrapper. I kept it in my pocket like some kind of talisman, because it was the first time in weeks anyone had treated me like I was human, like I mattered. And I thought maybe if someone that kind existed in the world, maybe you were right. Maybe things could get better. She laughed, but it came out broken and wrong. And then they got so much worse. I lost the room I was renting because I couldn't make the payment. My landlord threw my stuff in the hallway and changed the locks while I was out looking for work. I tried a shelter, but they were full. I slept in my car until someone broke in and stole everything I had left. My wallet, my phone, the last bit of cash I'd been saving. Everything. The words spilled out faster now, like a dam breaking. I've been sleeping in parking garages and bus stations for the past week, washing up in public bathrooms, trying to stay invisible. And last night it was so cold, and I was walking through this neighborhood looking for somewhere warm, and I recognized this building. I remembered it from that day, from seeing you come out to the service entrance with a coffee cup. And I thought, I thought if I would just get inside for a few minutes, just long enough to get warm and clean, I could keep going. I could figure out the next step. She looked up at him with eyes that held too much pain for someone who couldn't be more than 35. I wasn't going to stay. I wasn't going to take anything. I was just so tired of being cold. The explanation settled between them like something fragile. Ethan stood there processing it, trying to reconcile the woman in front of him with the person he'd helped at the convenience store, trying to understand how someone could fall that far that fast. 3 weeks from having a place to live to sleeping in parking garages. It was the kind of downward spiral he'd nearly experienced himself, back when Lily was a baby and he'd been one missed paycheck away from eviction, one broken down car away from losing everything. The distance between stability and catastrophe was always smaller than people wanted to believe. Lily's voice carried from the kitchen, pitched loud enough to reach the bedroom. "Daddy, is the lady okay?" Claire's face crumpled. She pressed her hands over her mouth like she could physically hold back the emotion. But tears leaked out anyway, tracking down her cheeks in paths that had been worn smooth by repetition. "I'm so sorry," she whispered through her fingers. "I'm sorry, I'll leave right now. I shouldn't have come here. I shouldn't have involved you. I'll just go." She started to stand, using the shower door for support, her movements unsteady. Ethan found himself moving without thinking, reaching out to steady her elbow when she swayed slightly. She was freezing, her skin cold enough that he could feel it through the thick fabric of the towel. "When's the last time you ate something?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. She blinked at him like she'd forgotten such a thing as food existed. Yesterday, I think. There was a church that was giving out sandwiches, but I missed dinner because I was trying to find somewhere to sleep before dark, and by the time I found a spot, the shelter kitchens were closed. Yesterday, maybe. She wasn't even sure. Ethan thought about the gala he'd attended, the plates of food he'd barely touched, the waste that had been casually accepted as part of the evening's excess. He thought about Pemberton telling him to think of employees as replaceable labor, about the board members who'd nodded along like that was just common sense. He thought about his daughter asking why the lady was crying and immediately offering the only help she could think of. Sometimes children understood things adults had forgotten. He made a decision that the rational part of his brain screamed was reckless. "Come on," he said, his voice coming out gruffer than intended. "You're going to eat something before you fall over, and then we're going to figure this out." Claire stared at him like he'd started speaking a foreign language. "I can't. I shouldn't. You have a daughter. You don't know me. I could be anyone. You're someone who's hungry and cold and who helped my daughter feel compassion instead of fear," Ethan said. "That's enough for right now." He guided her out of the bathroom, keeping a hand on her elbow because she still looked unsteady on her feet. The hallway stretched ahead of them, all hardwood and recessed lighting and designer touches that had come with the penthouse. Claire moved like she was afraid to touch anything, like she might leave contamination behind. The kitchen was at the far end of the apartment, a sprawling space of granite counters and stainless steel appliances that Ethan had never quite learned to use properly. Lilith was sitting at the island, swinging her legs and watching the doorway with the patient expectation of someone who knew her father would eventually do the right thing. She brightened when she saw Claire, then frowned when she got a better look at her. "You're still wet. You need dry clothes." Ethan hadn't thought that far ahead, but Lily was right. Claire's clothes were soaked through, and the towel wrapped around her shoulders wasn't going to fix that. He did some quick mental calculations about sizes and what might be in his closet that could work. "I'll find you something," he said, directing Claire toward one of the island stools. "Sit. Don't move. Lily, can you pour some orange juice?" His daughter nodded seriously and slid off her stool to retrieve the juice from the refrigerator, a task that required both hands and careful concentration. Ethan took the opportunity to disappear into his bedroom, rifling through drawers until he found an old coal logistics sweatshirt and a pair of sweatpants that would be too big but at least would be dry and warm. When he returned to the kitchen, Lily had managed to pour juice into a glass without spilling and was presenting it to Claire with the pride of someone who'd accomplished something significant. Claire took the glass with shaking hands and drank like someone who'd forgotten what it felt like to have anything in their stomach. Ethan set the clothes on the counter. Bathrooms down that hall, second door on the right. Change into these. Take your time. Claire looked at the clothes, then at him, then at Lily, and something in her expression broke open. Why are you being nice to me? The question hung in the air, raw and honest. Ethan thought about all the possible answers. Because I've been where you are. Because my daughter's watching and learning what it means to be human. Because I can afford to and you can't. Because walking past people who need help is how we lose ourselves piece by piece. Instead, he said simply, because everyone deserves a chance to be warm and fed. Go change. We'll talk after. Claire disappeared down the hallway with the clothes clutched to her chest. Ethan turned his attention to the refrigerator, pulling out eggs and bread and butter, ingredients for something simple. His hands moved through the familiar motions of cracking eggs and heating a pan. Muscle memory from years of making breakfast for Lily on mornings when the nanny hadn't arrived yet. Mornings when it was just the two of them against the world. Lily climbed back onto her stool and watched him cook with the focused attention she usually reserved for her favorite cartoons. Is the lady going to stay with us? The question was so direct, it caught Ethan off guard. He scrambled the eggs, buying himself time to formulate an answer that was honest without being alarming. I don't know, sweetheart. She's going through a hard time. Sometimes people need help. Like when Daddy needed help after Mommy left? The observation landed with the precision of a knife between ribs. Ethan had tried to shield Lily from the worst of those years. From the nights when he'd stayed up until 3 in the morning trying to balance a budget that wouldn't balance. From the times he'd skip meals so she could have enough. From the constant grinding fear that one more thing going wrong would push them over the edge. But children notice more than adults gave them credit for. Yeah, he said, his voice rough. Like that. Then we should help her, Lily said with the simple logic of someone who hadn't yet learned that the world was more complicated than helping people who needed it. That's what you always say. We help people when they're stuck. Ethan plated the scrambled eggs just as Claire emerged from the hallway. She looked different in his old clothes, the sweatshirt hanging loose on her frame, the sweatpants rolled up at the ankles. Her hair was still damp, but she tried to comb it with her fingers, and the act of being clean and dry had brought some color back to her face. She stopped in the kitchen doorway like she wasn't sure she was allowed to enter. Sit, Ethan said, gesturing to the island. Eat. The command came out more curtly than he'd intended, but Claire didn't seem to notice. She sat down next to Lillian, stared at the plate of eggs like she couldn't quite believe they were real. When she picked up the fork, her hands were still shaking, but she managed to get the first bite to her mouth. Ethan watched her eat, watched the way she tried to go slowly but couldn't quite manage it, watched the relief that crossed her face with each swallow. He'd seen that look before in his own mirror, back when a full meal was something to be grateful for rather than something to take for granted. Lily chatted beside her, asking questions that ranged from whether Claire liked dinosaurs to whether she'd ever seen snow that stuck to the ground instead of melting right away. Claire answered between bites, her voice getting steadier as food hit her system, and Ethan found himself studying her with the assessment skills he'd developed running a company. She spoke well with grammar and diction that suggested education. Her hands, despite the trembling, moved with a certain precision when she gestured. She knew how to interact with a child, how to engage without talking down. Whatever had happened to put her on the street, she hadn't started there. When she'd finished the eggs and half a piece of toast, she set down her fork and looked at him with eyes that had gone cautious again. I need to tell you something about why I was in your building specifically. It's not just that I saw you leave here that day. Ethan leaned against the counter, arms crossed, and waited. Claire took a breath. I used to work at TechCorp. Do you know them? The name hit Ethan like cold water. TechCorp was one of Cole Logistics' largest clients, a $5 million annual contract for shipping and warehousing their hardware components. The partnership had been crucial to Cole Logistics' growth, the kind of relationship that opened doors to other major accounts. I know them, he said carefully. We handle their logistics. Claire nodded, something that might have been relief crossing her face. I was an executive assistant there, to Robert Marsh, the CEO. I worked for him for 6 years. I was good at my job. He trusted me with sensitive information, access to files most employees never saw. She paused, her fingers twisting together in her lap. About 4 months ago, I started noticing things that didn't add up. Discrepancies in financial reports, payments going to shell companies that didn't seem to exist, contracts with vendors that had no online presence. At first, I thought maybe I was misunderstanding something, that there was a legitimate explanation. So I started asking questions. Quietly at first, Ethan's stomach began to sink. He had a feeling he knew where this was going. Marsh told me not to worry about it, said it was all above board, all part of normal business operations. But the more I looked, the more I realized something was very wrong. There was fraud happening, money being siphoned out of the company into private accounts, millions of dollars. And when I found evidence, when I made copies of files, I made the mistake of confronting him about it. Her voice had gone flat, the kind of emotionless recitation people use when talking about trauma they'd processed too many times. He smiled at me, this cold, empty smile, and he told me I was a smart woman, and smart women knew when to keep their mouths shut. I was scared, but I was also angry. So I made more copies. I took them home on a USB drive. I was planning to go to the authorities. But he found out, Ethan said. Claire nodded. I don't know how. Maybe he was monitoring my computer. Maybe someone saw me. But he knew. He called me into his office and fired me on the spot, claimed I'd been stealing from the company, had security escort me out of the building. Within hours, my bank accounts were frozen. My apartment was broken into. I went to the police, but they said there was no evidence of a break-in, that it sounded like a civil matter. That's when I realized Marsh had connections. People who could make problems disappear. She looked up at Ethan with eyes that held a terrible clarity. I've been running ever since, staying off the grid, avoiding cameras, using cash when I could. The files I took are on a USB drive hidden in my coat lining. I've been trying to figure out how to get them to someone who could help, but everyone I've approached either doesn't believe me or is too scared to get involved. And Marsh has people looking for me. I know he does. I've seen them. The kitchen felt too small suddenly, the walls pressing in. Ethan thought about the board meeting scheduled for next week, about the quarterly review where TechCorp's contract would be cited as a major success story. He thought about Pemberton and the other board members who valued profit margins over principles. He thought about what helping Claire might cost. Why did you come here, he asked. To this building specifically. If you knew TechCorp was our client, you had to know this was complicated. Claire's laugh came out bitter. I didn't know you lived here until I saw the name on the directory in the service entrance. I just recognized the building from that day I saw you. And I was desperate and freezing, and I thought maybe if I could just get warm for an hour, I could think straight enough to figure out my next move. I wasn't planning to involve you. I didn't want to drag anyone else into this. Before Ethan could respond, his phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced at the screen and felt his blood run cold. The email was from an address he recognized immediately. Robert Marsh's personal account, not his TechCorp email. The subject line was blank. The message itself was only 2 sentences. Heard you're harboring my former employee. Bad move, Cole. Business has consequences. Attached was a police report, Claire's name highlighted in yellow, charges of corporate theft laid out in official language that made her sound like a criminal rather than a whistleblower. Ethan stared at the email, his mind racing through implications. Marsh knew Claire was here. Somehow he knew, which meant he was watching, or had people watching, or had access to information that should have been private. Claire had gone pale, her eyes fixed on his face. What is it? He turned the phone so she could see the screen. The color drained from her face so fast he thought she might pass out. I have to go, she said, standing so abruptly her chair scraped against the floor. Right now, he knows I'm here. He'll come after you. He'll destroy you like he destroyed me. I can't let that happen. But Ethan was already thinking, his mind shifting into the mode that had built a company from nothing. The mode that saw problems as puzzles to be solved rather than obstacles to flee from. It's too late for that, he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline starting to pump through his system. He sent this email. That means he wants me to know he knows. He's trying to scare me into throwing you out, into cutting ties before this gets complicated. Then do it, Claire said, desperation creeping into her voice. Please, you have a daughter. You have a life. Don't let me destroy that. Lily had been watching the exchange with wide eyes, and now she slid off her stool and walked over to Claire. She took the woman's hand in both of hers, her small fingers wrapping around Claire's wrist. "Don't go," she said simply. "Please don't go." Claire looked down at Lily, and something in her expression broke. Tears spilled over, and she dropped to her twin, bringing herself to eye level with the child. "I have to, sweetheart. I'm sorry, but I can't stay here. It's not safe." "Then we'll make it safe," Lily said, with the absolute certainty of someone too young to understand that some problems couldn't be fixed with determination and good intentions. Ethan felt something settle in his chest, a weight that was somehow lighter than the guilt he'd been carrying around for months. He thought about Pemberton's speech at the gala, about treating people as replaceable. He thought about the sandwich he'd given Claire because it was the right thing to do, because he remembered being hungry and scared and alone. He thought about the kind of man he wanted to be, the kind of man he wanted his daughter to see him as. He thought about the fact that walking away now, throwing Claire out to protect his business relationship with a company run by a man who committed fraud and destroyed lives, would make him exactly the kind of CEO he'd promised himself he'd never become. The decision crystallized. "You're not going anywhere," he said, his voice carrying the authority he usually reserved for board meetings. "Not until we figure this out properly." Claire stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "You don't understand what you're risking. Marsh has resources, connections. He can make your life very difficult. He can destroy your company's reputation. He can try," Ethan interrupted. "But here's what he doesn't know about me. 15 years ago, I was a delivery driver making $11 an hour. 10 years ago, I got laid off from a manufacturing plant and spent 6 months barely scraping by. 8 years ago, my wife walked out and left me with a 3-month-old baby and no idea how I was going to manage. I built this company from nothing because I didn't have any other choice, because I had to survive, because giving up wasn't an option." He met Claire's eyes and saw his own past reflected there. "Marsh thinks I'm just another CEO who'll protect his profit margins at any cost. He thinks I'll fold because I have something to lose. But he doesn't understand that everything I have, I built by not folding when things got hard. And I'm not about to start now." Claire's breath hitched. "Why? Why would you risk everything for someone you don't even know?" Lily answered before Ethan could. "Because that's what good people do. Daddy says we always help people who are stuck, even when it's hard." Out of the mouths of children came truths that adults spent lifetimes trying to articulate. Ethan looked at his daughter and felt a surge of love so fierce it made his chest ache. "What she said," he managed, his voice rough. Claire stood slowly, still holding Lily's hand, and for a long moment, she just looked at them. Father and daughter standing in their expensive kitchen, in their expensive penthouse, offering help to someone who had nothing and who brought nothing but trouble. The absurdity of it must have struck her because she laughed, a sound that came out half sob. "You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the most foolish." "Probably both," Ethan admitted. "But here's what we're going to do. You're going to stay here, at least temporarily. You're going to help me with organizational work, scheduling, whatever administrative tasks you can handle, because I'm drowning in paperwork and my actual assistant quit last month. You're not Charity. You're someone with skills I need. And while you're doing that, we're going to figure out how to get those files to the right people in a way that keeps everyone safe. The board will never approve. The board doesn't get a vote on who I hire for personal administrative assistance," Ethan said. "And by the time they find out, it'll be too late to object without looking petty." Claire shook her head slowly, like she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. "This is insane. You realize that, right? This is completely insane." "Welcome to my life," Ethan said. "Insane is pretty much my baseline these days." He walked over to his phone and read Marsh's email again, this time with fresh eyes. The threat was clear but vague, the kind of thing designed to intimidate without providing concrete evidence of wrongdoing. It was a power play, an attempt to establish dominance, to make Ethan back down before things even started. Which meant Marsh was worried. Which meant the files Claire had were damaging enough to warrant this kind of response. Ethan opened a new email and typed quickly, his fingers moving with the decisiveness of someone who'd made a choice and wasn't looking back. "Mr. Marsh, I appreciate your concern. However, Ms. Bennett is now in my employ as a personal administrative assistant. Any questions about her past employment should be directed through proper legal channels. I look forward to continuing our professional relationship. Best, Ethan Cole. He hit send before he could second-guess himself. Claire had gone white again. You just made yourself a target. I was a target the moment he sent that first email, Ethan said. This just makes my position clear, and it puts him on notice that I'm not playing his game. His phone buzzed almost immediately. Another email from Marsh, this one with more text. You're making a mistake you'll regret. That contract renewal you're hoping for? Consider it dead. And that's just the beginning. I have friends on your board, Cole. I have connections you can't imagine. Walk away now or watch everything you've built crumble. Ethan felt his jaw tighten. There it was, the real threat. The board, the contract, the implication of power and influence that could destroy Cole Logistics from the inside. He showed Claire the email. She read it and her face went from white to gray. He's not bluffing. He really does have that kind of reach. You need to think about this. Really think about it. Is helping me worth losing your company? Lily was still holding Claire's hand, and now she tugged on it to get her attention. Daddy always says we don't let bullies win, even when they're scary. The simplicity of it cut through the complexity like a blade. Ethan looked at his daughter and realized she'd been paying attention all these years, absorbing lessons he hadn't consciously tried to teach, learning values from watching him navigate the world. Sometimes rescue wasn't about saving someone else. Sometimes it was about saving yourself from becoming someone you couldn't live with. We do this right, he said, his voice steady. We document everything. We get the files to people who can actually do something with them. And we prepare for Marsh to come at us with everything he's got. But we don't back down. We don't fold. And we don't let him win just because he's scary. Claire's eyes were bright with tears again, but this time they looked different. Less despair, more something that might have been hope if hope had learned to be cautious. I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me yet, Ethan said. This is going to get messy before it gets better, but we're going to see it through. Together. He held out his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Claire took it. Her grip was firm despite the trembling, and when she met his eyes, something passed between them that felt like the beginning of an alliance forged in desperation and determination. Outside the penthouse windows, Portland was waking up. The sky was turning from black to gray, the first hints of dawn touching the edges of buildings. Somewhere in that city, Robert Marsh was making plans. Somewhere the people who'd been hunting Claire were regrouping. Somewhere the fight was just beginning. But in the kitchen, with Lily holding Claire's other hand and the smell of scrambled eggs still lingering in the air, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in months. Purpose. Not the hollow purpose of quarterly earnings and board meetings and networking events that made him feel like an imposter. Real purpose. The kind that came from drawing a line in the sand and saying this far, no further. This person matters. This fight is worth having. His phone buzzed again. Another email, another threat. Ethan turned off his phone and set it face down on the counter. Right now, he said, we eat breakfast. Then we make a plan. One step at a time. Claire nodded, and for the first time since he'd found her in his bathroom, she smiled. It was as small and fragile, but it was real. Lily, satisfied that the adults had figured things out, returned to her orange juice and started telling a complicated story about a dinosaur who made friends with a pterodactyl, her voice filling the kitchen with the innocent certainty that good things were possible if you just tried hard enough. And maybe she was right. Maybe sometimes the impossible was just another word for what you hadn't tried yet. Outside, the sun continued to rise, indifferent to the storm gathering on the horizon. The guest bedroom had been unused for months, a space that existed more as concept than reality, in a penthouse designed for entertaining that never happened. Claire stood in the doorway at 7:30 that morning, freshly showered for the second time in as many hours, wearing clothes that Ethan had ordered delivered from a department store that opened early for preferred customers. She'd protested the expense until he'd pointed out that walking around in his sweatpants wasn't exactly professional if she was supposed to be working. The room had cream walls and furniture that looked expensive because it was, the kind of design that prioritized aesthetic over warmth. Claire touched the edge of the dresser like she was afraid it might vanish if she applied too much pressure. Ethan watched from the hallway, seeing the space through her perspective. Sterile, impersonal, nothing like a home. Her voice came out quiet. I don't belong here. The statement wasn't self-pity, just observation. Ethan leaned against the door frame, considering his response. 6 months ago, I didn't belong here either. 5 years ago, I was sleeping on a futon in a studio where the heat only worked half the time. Belonging is just getting used to where you are until it stops feeling wrong. Claire turned to face him, and in the morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, he could see details he'd missed earlier. Fine lines around her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. A scar on her chin, faint but visible. Hands that had been scrubbed raw but still carried dirt under the nails that would take days to fully disappear. She'd spent 3 weeks on the street. The evidence lived in her body. If I'm working for you, I should probably know what I'm supposed to be doing. Practical, direct. The shift in tone told Ethan she'd made a decision to compartmentalize, to focus on the immediate and manageable rather than the overwhelming totality of her situation. He could respect that. My office is a disaster. I've got 3 months of correspondence I haven't properly filed, a calendar system that makes no sense because I keep changing it, and about 40 different projects that need tracking. My last assistant quit because I'm apparently impossible to work with. Fair warning. The corner of Claire's mouth twitched, almost a smile. I organized Robert Marsh's entire operation for 6 years. If I could handle his ego and his completely irrational filing system, I can probably manage yours. 2 hours later, Ethan sat in his home office watching Claire transform chaos into order with the efficiency of someone who'd spent years mastering exactly this kind of work. She'd commandeered his desk, relegating him to the leather chair in the corner, usually reserved for reading financial reports he never had time to properly absorb. Papers that had been scattered across every available surface were now sorted into stacks with labels written in her precise handwriting. File names that had made sense only to him were being reorganized into a system that actually followed logic. She moved through the work with focus that bordered on meditation, and Ethan realized she was using it as an anchor. Something familiar, something she could control when everything else had spun wildly beyond her grasp. His phone rang. The private investigator he'd called at 6:30 that morning, before Claire had emerged from the guest room. Marcus Webb had come recommended by the company's legal team as the best in the business, former FBI with connections throughout federal law enforcement. The conversation had been brief but productive. Webb would start immediately, needed 48 hours for preliminary findings, charged rates that made Ethan grateful he could afford them. The callback came faster than expected. Mr. Cole, I've got some initial information you need to hear. It's not good. Ethan stepped into the hallway, closing the office door behind him. Claire glanced up briefly but returned to her work when he gestured that he'd be a moment. Webb's voice came through the phone, clipped and professional. Robert Marsh is dirty, not just white-collar fraud dirty, connected dirty. I've got sources confirming he's been laundering money through TechCorp for at least 3 years, using shell companies to move cash from sources you don't want to think too hard about. Your Ms. Bennett stumbled onto something bigger than corporate embezzlement. She found evidence of organized crime using legitimate business as a front. Ethan felt cold spread through his chest. How certain are you? Certain enough that I'm advising you to be very careful. The people Marsh does business with don't appreciate exposure. They deal with problems permanently. If they think Ms. Bennett has evidence that could unravel their operation, they won't stop at threatening emails. The implication hung in the air like smoke. What do you recommend? Get the evidence to federal authorities as quickly as possible. Make it public enough that eliminating the source becomes pointless. And in the meantime, increase security. These aren't amateurs we're dealing with. Ethan thanked him and ended the call. Through the office door's glass panel, he could see Claire working, unaware that the danger she'd been running from was exponentially worse than either of them had understood. He should tell her. She deserved to know. But first, he needed to make some calls. Lily appeared at his elbow, materializing with the supernatural stealth that 6-year-olds somehow mastered. She tugged on his shirt. Claire says she can make lunch if we have ingredients. Can we have grilled cheese? The kind with the tomato soup? Simple requests, normal childhood needs. The mundane interrupting the catastrophic. Ethan looked down at his daughter and felt determination crystallize into something harder than fear. Yes, sweetheart, we can have grilled cheese. The board meeting wasn't scheduled until next week, but Richard Pemberton called at 2 o'clock that afternoon with the tone of someone who'd discovered a problem that needed immediate correction. Ethan, we need to talk about your new assistant. No preamble, no courtesy, just direct accusation wrapped in corporate politeness. Claire Bennett is highly qualified. She has 6 years of executive-level experience. She also has allegations of corporate theft on her record, and she's connected to Robert Marsh, who happens to be one of our most important clients. This looks bad, Ethan. Really bad. The optics alone, the allegations are false. Marsh planted them because she discovered fraud he was committing. I'm helping her clear her name. Silence on the other end, the kind of silence that meant Pemberton was recalculating, adjusting his approach. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted from collegial to formal. I'm calling an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. We need to discuss this situation and its potential impact on the company. There's nothing to discuss. Who I hire for personal administrative work is my decision. Not when it threatens a $5 million contract and puts the entire company at risk. Tomorrow, Ethan, 9 a.m. Be prepared to explain yourself. The call ended before Ethan could respond. Claire had stopped working. She stood in the office doorway, her expression carefully neutral in a way that suggested she'd heard enough to understand what was happening. I should leave before the meeting. Make it easier for you to salvage the relationship with Marsh. No, hey, Ethan, I'm not throwing you to the wolves to make my board happy. End of discussion. She looked like she wanted to argue, but movement outside caught both their attention. Through the penthouse's front windows, the street below was visible. A black sedan had pulled up across from the building entrance, sleek and expensive in a way that made it stand out in the residential neighborhood. It sat there, engine running, not parking, not leaving, just watching. Ethan's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Nice place you've got. Shame if something happened to it. He showed Claire the message. Her face went pale, but her voice stayed steady. They're not subtle anymore. That means they're getting desperate, or they're trying to scare you into making a mistake. It's working. The admission came out before he could stop it. Claire's expression softened, sympathy mixing with something that might have been guilt. I'm sorry, I never meant for any of this to touch you or Lily. If you'd known, you still would have had nowhere else to go. The problem isn't you. The problem is them. The black sedan stayed for another hour before finally pulling away, but the message had been delivered. We know where you live. We can reach you whenever we want. You're not safe. That evening, Ethan went down to the parking garage to retrieve his car for a quick run to pick up the prescription medication Lily needed for her occasional asthma. The garage was well lit and secure, part of the building's premium amenities, monitored by cameras and accessible only via keycard. He approached his Tesla, the sleek Model S that his CFO had insisted was the appropriate vehicle for a CEO, and something made him pause. Instinct. The same instinct that had made him successful in business by noticing when details didn't quite align. He knelt down beside the front wheel and looked underneath. Fluid pooled on the concrete. Dark, spreading slowly. He touched it with his finger and brought it close to his face. Brake fluid, unmistakable. His hands were steady as he pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight. The brake line had been cut cleanly, precisely, not damaged, severed. Someone had crawled under his car and deliberately sabotaged it. If he'd driven out of the garage, made it to the street, picked up speed before hitting the brakes, the image of Lily in the back seat flashed through his mind. His hands started shaking. He called building security first, then the police. By the time they arrived, he'd photographed everything from multiple angles, documented the evidence with the thoroughness of someone who understood that details mattered when things went legal. The security guard looked genuinely shaken. The cameras had been looped, he explained. A 15-minute window between 8 and 8:15 that evening where the footage showed nothing but static. Professional work. Someone who knew what they were doing. The police took statements, filed a report, promised to investigate. But their expressions said what they didn't verbalize. Without witnesses or usable footage, there wasn't much to pursue. Ethan returned to the penthouse to find Claire standing by the window, Lily asleep in her room, and tension radiating from every line of her posture. Something happened. Not a question. She'd learned to read danger in the past 3 weeks, developed instincts for when situations deteriorated. Brake line cut professionally. Claire's breath hitched. Her reflection in the window glass showed eyes that had gone dark with horror. They're escalating. Next time it won't be a warning. Next time they'll make sure it works. I'm hiring private security, armed, multiple guards, whatever it takes. They'll find a way around it. Marsh has resources, connections. He's not going to stop until either I'm dead or that USB drive is destroyed. And now you're in the crosshairs too. Ethan moved to stand beside her, looking out at the city lights stretching toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, people were making plans to hurt them. Somewhere, violence was being calculated and prepared. He thought about backing down, about cutting ties with Claire, and returning to the safe simplicity of profit margins and board meetings, and a life that didn't include death threats and sabotaged vehicles. The thought lasted maybe 3 seconds before disgust replaced it. We're not folding. The board meeting started exactly at 9 p.m. in the conference room of Cole Logistics' downtown office. 7 directors sat around the table, faces ranging from concerned to actively hostile. Ethan took his seat at the head, Claire conspicuously absent because he'd insisted she stay at the penthouse with the security detail he had hired the night before. Pemberton opened without ceremony. Gentlemen, we have a serious problem. Our CEO has employed a woman accused of corporate theft. This woman is connected to Robert Marsh, CEO of Tech Corp, which holds our largest client contract. Marsh had made it clear that continuing this employment will result in termination of that contract. $5 million annually, 20% of our revenue. We're here to discuss how to resolve this situation before it destroys the company. Thomas Chen, the CFO, jumped in immediately. I've run the numbers. Losing Tech Corp would require cutting 40 jobs minimum, possibly more. We'd need to close 1 warehouse, scale back operations significantly. All of this to protect a woman we've known for less than 48 hours. Eyes turned to Ethan, waiting for his response, expecting him to see reason, to make the logical choice, to prioritize the company over sentiment. He met each gaze in turn before speaking. 15 years ago, I was a delivery driver making $11 an hour. I worked hard, showed up on time, did my job well, and when the company I worked for needed to cut costs, I was laid off without warning. No severance, no explanation. Just a box for my belongings and security escorting me out. I had a 3-month-old daughter and no idea how I was going to feed her. Pemberton's expression suggested he didn't see the relevance, but Ethan continued. I built Cole Logistics on a principle that people matter more than profit margins, that loyalty goes both ways, that we treat our employees like human beings, not replaceable parts. Every single person in this room has benefited from that approach. Our retention rates are the highest in the industry. Our employees work harder because they know we value them. That's not sentiment. That's smart business. That's very touching, Pemberton cut in, his voice dripping condescension. But it has nothing to do with the current situation. It has everything to do with it. Claire Bennett uncovered fraud, major fraud. Instead of being protected, she was destroyed. Her boss used his power and connections to ruin her life because she tried to do the right thing. And now we're sitting here debating whether to abandon her to save a contract with the same man who destroyed her. You want to know what that makes us? Silence. It makes us complicit. It makes us the kind of company that values money over ethics. And if we do that, if we partner with criminals and throw whistleblowers under the bus, then everything I built here means nothing. Chen leaned forward, his tone placating. Ethan, nobody's questioning your values. But we have a responsibility to our shareholders, our employees. 500 people depend on this company. Can we really risk their livelihoods for one person? Those 500 people trust us to be better than this. And the moment we prove we're not, the moment we show that our principles only matter when they're convenient, we lose the foundation that made this company successful. Pemberton's patience snapped. This is exactly what I warned about. You're too soft, Too attached to some working-class fantasy of noble poverty. You're a CEO now, Ethan. Act like it. Make the hard choice. Fire the woman, keep the contract. Save the company. The words hit like physical blows, each one designed to cut at the exact insecurity Ethan carried. The fear that he didn't belong in this world, that he was playing at being a businessman, that his background disqualified him from making real decisions. He thought about his daughter asking why they helped people even when it was hard. He thought about Claire organizing his office with the competence of someone who deserved a chance to rebuild. He thought about the kind of man he wanted to be when he looked in the mirror. When he spoke, his voice carried absolute certainty. I'd rather lose this company than lose my integrity. If we can't stand for what's right when it costs us something, then we don't stand for anything at all. Claire stays. The contract with TechCorp ends the moment they make that ultimatum official. And if any of you can't accept that, there's the door. Pemberton stood immediately. Then you've made your choice. I'm calling for a vote of no confidence. We remove Ethan as CEO and install leadership that will prioritize the company's survival. The motion was seconded. The vote was called. 4 directors voted to keep Ethan. 3 voted to remove him. The margin was razor thin, bought by loyalty from the directors he'd personally recruited, the ones who remembered where the company came from. Pemberton's face went red. He gathered his papers and stood. This is a mistake you'll regret. And when this company collapses, when those 500 employees are out of work, remember that you chose one woman over all of them. He walked out. 2 other directors followed him, their resignations implicit in their departure. The remaining board members sat in stunned silence. Chen finally spoke, his voice subdued. The stock is going to tank when this gets out. Probably, Ethan agreed, but we'll survive. We always do. He returned to the penthouse at noon to find it empty. The security guards he'd hired were gone. Claire's few belongings had vanished from the guest room. On the kitchen counter, a note in her precise handwriting. I can't let you destroy everything you have built for me. The USB drive is in the flour canister. Give it to the authorities. Don't look for me. Thank you for trying. See. Panic hit first, followed immediately by anger. She'd slipped past professional security, disappeared into a city of 600,000 people, and left him holding evidence that made him a target without even the justification of protecting her. Lily found him staring at the note, and her face crumpled. She left? Like Mommy left? The comparison carved through Ethan's chest like a blade. His daughter had abandonment written into her history, and now she was watching it play out again. I'm going to find her, sweetheart. She didn't leave because she wanted to. She left because she thought it would protect us. Then bring her back. Tell her we're safer together. Simple wisdom from a 6-year-old. Ethan pulled out his phone and started making calls. The shelter on Southeast Division Street was the same one Claire had tried 3 weeks earlier, the one that had been full, the one with the waiting list that stretched for weeks. Ethan arrived at 2 in the afternoon, bypassing the intake process and walking directly to the dormitory area where women waited for beds that might or might not materialize. Claire sat in a plastic chair near the back, her shoulders hunched inward, making herself small. When she saw him, her expression cycled through surprise, relief, and guilt before settling on resignation. She stood as he approached, her voice barely above a whisper. You shouldn't have come. You left. I had to. The board was right. I'm destroying everything you worked for. The board was wrong, or at least the ones who quit were wrong. We won the vote. You staying doesn't cost me the company. Hope flickered in her eyes before doubt smothered it. For now. But when TechCorp pulls the contract, when the stock drops, when employees start getting laid off because revenue's down, you'll regret this. You'll regret me. Ethan moved closer, lowering his voice so the conversation stayed between them. 10 years ago, a stranger gave me $50 when I was counting change to buy diapers, handed it to me in a grocery store parking lot, and said, pay it forward. I never saw them again. Never got their name. But that $50 meant I could feed my daughter for a week. It meant I didn't have to choose between food and rent. It meant everything. Claire's breath caught. I've spent a decade trying to pay that forward. Building a company that treats people with dignity, helping employees when they're struggling, making choices based on what's right instead of what's profitable. And every time I do it, I remember that stranger who helped me when I had nothing. He reached out and took her hand, feeling how cold her fingers were despite the shelter's heating. You're not destroying what I built. You're the reason I built it in the first place, to help people who need it, to stand up against bullies who think power makes them untouchable, to prove that we can be better than the worst examples around us. Claire's eyes were bright with tears she refused to let fall. I'm falling for you, and that terrifies me, because everyone I've ever cared about has been hurt. But walking away now wouldn't keep you safe. It would just mean I abandon you to fight this alone, and I can't do that. The words settled between them, honest and raw. Claire's hand tightened around his. This is insane. We barely know each other. We're being hunted by criminals. Your company is imploding. This is the worst possible foundation for anything real. Probably, but I'd rather have something real in the middle of chaos than something safe that means nothing. She laughed, the sound breaking around the edges. You are either the bravest person I've ever met or completely out of your mind. Can it be both? The almost smile that crossed her face made something warm bloom in Ethan's chest. He was about to say something else, something about coming back to the penthouse where security could actually protect her, when his phone buzzed with an alert from the security company he had hired. Intruder detected at penthouse, armed response activated. His blood went cold. Lily. Claire's face went white as understanding hit. They were already moving, running for the exit, Ethan calling the guards as they burst onto the street. The line rang twice before connecting. Mr. Cole, we have the situation contained. 3 individuals attempted to breach the service entrance. We've detained them and called the police. Your daughter is safe in the panic room as per protocol. Relief hit so hard, Ethan had to lean against a building to stay upright. Claire gripped his arm, her own relief palpable. But the message was clear. They'd come to the penthouse. They'd tried to get to Lily. This had escalated beyond threats. His phone rang. Marcus Webb, the PA. Mr. Cole, you need to move your family now. My sources just confirmed that Marsh has put out a contract. $50,000 to whoever retrieves that USB drive and eliminates the witness. These are professionals he's hired. They won't stop. We detained 3 at my penthouse 20 minutes ago. Those weren't the professionals. Those were local thugs, testing your security. The real threat is still coming. Ethan made a decision. We're leaving the city. Tonight. Do you know somewhere safe? I can arrange a safe house, but you need to understand running only buys time. The permanent solution is getting that evidence to federal authorities in a way that makes killing you pointless. Then arrange both, safe house and federal contact. We end this. The next 2 hours passed in a blur. Ethan returned to the penthouse long enough to collect Lily from the panic room, pack essentials, and retrieve the USB drive from the flour canister where Claire had hidden it. The security team reported that police had taken the 3 intruders into custody, but without concrete evidence of intent to harm, they'd likely be released within hours. Claire helped pack with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to move quickly, who understood that staying in one place meant vulnerability. She and Lily worked together, the child chattering about what stuffed animals needed to come, and Claire responding with gentle patience that made the crisis feel almost normal. By 6 p.m., they were in a car driven by one of Webb's associates, heading east out of Portland. The driver was ex-military, silent and competent, taking routes that avoided major highways and kept checking mirrors for tails. Lily fell asleep in the back seat, her head on Claire's lap. Claire stroked the child's hair with gentle repetition, and Ethan watched them in the rearview mirror, this accidental family created by circumstance and crisis. Claire caught him looking, and something passed between them. Unspoken, complex. The recognition that they were bound together now by more than just mutual survival. The safe house turned out to be a cabin an hour outside Portland, tucked into forest that provided natural cover. Basic but secure, with reinforced doors and a security system that would alert them to anyone approaching within 100 yards. They carried Lily inside without waking her, settling her on one of the 2 bedrooms. The space was small, furnished with the bare minimum, everything focused on function over comfort. Claire stood in the main room, looking around with an expression that might have been exhaustion or might have been surrender. We can't run forever. We won't have to. Webb is setting up a meeting with a federal contact, someone who specializes in corporate fraud and organized crime. We get them the evidence, they build a case, and Marsh becomes too exposed to keep coming after us. And if it doesn't work? Ethan moved to stand beside her, close enough to feel her warmth. Then we figure out plan B, but we do it together. No more running off to protect me. No more trying to face this alone. She turned to face him fully, and in the dim light of the cabin, her features were soft and vulnerable in a way he hadn't seen before. Why are you doing this, really? Not the noble speeches about paying it forward, the real reason. He thought about lying, about falling back on platitudes. But she deserved better than that. Because walking away from you would destroy something in me I've been trying to protect my entire adult life. The belief that people matter more than profit. That doing the right thing counts for something. That we can be better than the world expects us to be. His hand found hers in the space between them. And because somewhere in the past 48 hours you stopped being a stranger I was helping and became someone I can't imagine not fighting for. Claire's breath hitched. She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her eyes, the way her pulse jumped at her throat. This is a terrible idea. We're being hunted. We barely know each other. Everything about this is insane. I know. We should be focusing on survival, not whatever this is. I know. If we do this, if we let this be real, it's going to complicate everything. I know. She reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw with gentle precision. Then kiss me anyway. Let me have something good before the world falls apart again. He closed the distance between them, his lips meeting hers with a tenderness that felt like coming home. She melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, and for a moment the chaos receded. There was just this, connection, warmth, the possibility that something good could grow even in the worst circumstances. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Claire rested her forehead against his. We're going to survive this. We have to, because I want more of that. Ethan was about to respond when movement outside caught his attention. Through the window, a shadow moved between trees, too large to be an animal, too deliberate to be accident. He pulled Claire down behind the couch just as the first gunshot shattered the window. Glass rained down in crystalline fragments, catching moonlight as it scattered across hardwood floors. Ethan's body covered Claire's, instinct overriding thought, his weight pressing her into the narrow space behind the couch. A second shot punched through the cabin wall 3 feet above their heads, splintering wood with a crack that echoed in the confined space. Lily's scream from the bedroom cut through the chaos like a blade. Claire was moving before Ethan could stop her, combat crawling toward the hallway with speed born from desperation. He followed, keeping low, his mind cataloging details with the forced clarity that came when survival depended on processing information faster than panic could overwhelm it. 3 shooters minimum based on the shot patterns. Professional spacing. They'd surrounded the cabin. The bedroom door was closed. Claire yanked it open and dove inside, gathering Lily into her arms as the child sobbed with terror that bypassed language. Ethan slammed the door and shoved the dresser in front of it, wood scraping across floor in a sound that felt too loud, too exposed. His phone was already in his hand, dialing the emergency number Webb had programmed in. It rang once. They found us. Multiple shooters. We need extraction now. Webb's response came clipped and urgent. Basement, northwest corner. Escape tunnel. Leads half a mile into forest. Go now. Teams en route, but 15 minutes out. The basement stairs were in the hallway. Getting to them meant crossing open space in full view of the shattered window. Ethan looked at Claire, who had Lily pressed against her chest, the child's face buried in her shoulder. Their eyes met in the dim light filtering through curtains, and understanding passed without words. He went first, moving fast and low, bullets tracking his movement a second behind, hitting walls where he'd been instead of where he was. The basement door opened under his hand and he was through, Claire right behind him with Lily, her movements fluid despite the child's weight. The door closed, the lock engaged. Footsteps thundered on the porch above. The basement smelled like earth and old concrete, lit by a single bulb that cast shadows into corners thick with cobwebs. Northwest corner. Ethan found the panel Webb had described, hidden behind boxes of supplies that he shoved aside with strength powered by adrenaline. The tunnel entrance was narrow, barely wide enough for an adult, reinforced with aged timbers that spoke of construction decades old. Claire went first with Lily, disappearing into darkness that swallowed them whole. Ethan followed, pulling the panel closed behind him, hearing footsteps upstairs grow louder as the shooters breached the cabin. The tunnel floor was dirt-packed hard by time, sloping downward before leveling out, the walls close enough to brush his shoulders on both sides. Lily had stopped crying. The sudden silence was worse than screams, broken only by their breathing and the scuff of shoes on earth. Claire moved forward with hands outstretched, feeling her way through blackness absolute enough to erase the concept of sight. Ethan activated his phone's flashlight, the beam cutting through dark to reveal a passage that stretched impossibly far. They ran. Behind them, faint sounds of pursuit. Ahead, nothing but tunnel and hope. The exit came without warning, a vertical shaft with a ladder bolted to crumbling concrete. Claire climbed first, Lily clinging to her back like a baby monkey, and Ethan followed as voices echoed down the tunnel behind them. The shaft opened into forest dense with undergrowth, trees blocking moonlight to create darkness nearly as complete as the tunnel itself. Headlights cut through the forest, a vehicle approaching fast. Ethan pushed Claire and Lily behind a tree, his body between them and the unknown, his hands empty and useless against armed professionals. The vehicle stopped 50 feet away. Doors opened. Webb's voice cut through the night. "Cole, move your ass!" The SUV was armored, windows thick enough to stop bullets, interior configured for rapid extraction. They piled in, and the vehicle was moving before doors fully closed, tires spitting dirt as it accelerated down a fire road barely wide enough to accommodate its bulk. Webb sat in the passenger seat, turned to face them with an expression grim enough to make Ethan's stomach clench. That was a kill team. Ex-military contractors. Marsh is done playing games. He wants you dead, and that evidence destroyed, and he's willing to spend whatever it takes. Claire's arms were still wrapped around Lily, who had begun crying again in quieter, hiccuping sobs. Her voice came out hoarse. "How did they find us? The safe house was supposed to be secure." Someone talked, or got paid enough to stop caring about security. Doesn't matter now. What matters is we end this before they get another chance. Ethan felt rage building beneath the fear, hot and sharp. "You said you had a federal contact. Make the call. Tonight. We're done running." Webb nodded and pulled out a phone, dialing a number from memory. The conversation was brief, technical, full of jargon that Ethan only partially understood. When Webb ended the call, his expression had shifted from grim to something that might have been cautious optimism. "Special Agent Sarah Chen, FBI White Collar Crime Division. She's been investigating Marsh for 6 months on an unrelated tip. Your evidence could be the break she needs. Meeting set for tomorrow morning, federal building downtown. She'll have a full protection detail." Tomorrow felt impossibly far away. Ethan looked at Lily, who had finally calmed enough to doze fitfully in Claire's arms, her small face blotchy from crying. His daughter had been shot at, had crawled through darkness, fleeing armed killers, had her childhood violated by violence that no 6-year-old should ever witness. The weight of that settled in his chest like concrete. Claire's hand found his in the space between seats. Her fingers were cold but steady, and when she squeezed gently, he felt something in his chest ease fractionally. We survived tonight. We testify tomorrow. We end this. Her voice carried conviction that matched his own rage, and Ethan realized that somewhere in the chaos of the past 3 days, they'd become a unit. Not just two people thrown together by circumstance, but partners who moved in sync, who understood each other's thoughts without needing explanation. The SUV drove through darkness toward a destination Webb wouldn't disclose for security reasons. Lily slept. Claire stared out windows at passing shadows, and Ethan made plans for what came next. The federal building in downtown Portland was fortress architecture rendered in glass and steel, security checkpoints layered like an onion around the central core where Special Agent Sarah Chen waited in a conference room designed to prevent electronic surveillance. Webb had delivered them through underground parking, bypassing public entrances, surrounding them with enough armed agents to repel a small invasion. Chen was younger than Ethan expected, late 30s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She shook hands with precision that spoke of someone who understood the power of first impressions, then gestured them to chairs around a table that could have seated 20. Lily stayed with a female agent in an adjacent room, visible through glass panels, drawing pictures with markers while a cartoon played on mute. Ethan kept her in his peripheral vision, unable to fully focus until he could confirm her safety every few seconds. Claire placed the USB drive on the table between them like an offering. Chen picked it up with gloved hands and inserted it into an air-gapped laptop, her expression neutral as files began loading. The silence stretched. Minutes passed. Chen's face remained impassive, but tension built in her shoulders as she navigated through folders, opening documents, reviewing spreadsheets, listening to audio recordings through headphones. Finally, she removed the headphones and looked at Claire with respect that bordered on awe. "You've handed me everything. Wire transfers, shell company registrations, emails detailing payoffs, audio of Marsh explicitly discussing money laundering. This is prosecutorial gold. We're talking multiple felonies, RICO charges, potential life sentences for everyone involved." Relief flooded through Ethan so powerfully he had to grip the table edge to stay grounded. Beside him, Claire's breath released in a shudder that might have been a sob if she hadn't caught it first. Chen's expression shifted to something harder. "But you need to understand what comes next. Marsh has resources. Lawyers who cost more per hour than most people make in a week. Judges who owe him favors. Media connections that can spin narratives. This evidence is solid, but taking down someone with his power means crossing every T and dotting every I. One mistake, and the whole case collapses. What do you need from us?" "Testimony, detailed, on the record, legally binding. Ms. Bennett, you'll need to walk us through every document, every conversation, every moment that led to you discovering this fraud. Mr. Cole, you'll need to testify about the threats, the intimidation, the attempts on your life. We build an ironclad case that survives any legal challenge Marsh can afford to throw at it." Claire's hand found Ethan's under the table. "How long until arrests happen?" Chen smiled, and it wasn't pleasant. "Warrants are being drawn up now. We've been investigating Marsh for months, like I said, but we didn't have evidence this concrete. With what you've provided, we can move fast. 72 hours, maybe less. And once arrests start, it'll cascade. We'll flip lower-level players, build testimony chains, dismantle the entire operation." She stood, gathering the laptop with the care of someone handling explosives. "You'll be in protective custody until this is done. Secure location, armed guards, everything you need. I won't lie to you, Marsh is going to fight, but he's going to lose. Because what you've given us doesn't just prove fraud. It proves organized crime connections that bring federal RICO statutes into play. He's facing life in prison, and so are his associates. They can't make that go away no matter how much money they throw at it." 3 days in protective custody blurred together in sameness. The safe house was comfortable but sterile, all generic furniture and neutral colors designed to be forgettable. Federal agents rotated shifts, professional and distant, their presence a constant reminder that normal life had been suspended indefinitely. Lily adapted with the resilience of children, treating the situation like an extended sleepover, charming agents into coloring sessions and teaching them the rules of games she invented on the spot. Claire spent hours preparing testimony with prosecutors, walking through timelines and evidence chains until her voice went hoarse. Ethan fielded calls from Cole Logistics, managing crisis from lockdown. The stock had dropped 30% after news broke about the TechCorp contract termination. Employees were nervous. Clients were calling for reassurance. The company he'd built was hemorrhaging value while he sat in protective custody, unable to physically address the concerns. But Thomas Chen, the CFO who'd stayed loyal through the board meeting, stepped up. He held emergency all-hands meetings, sent company-wide memos about standing by principles, worked 18-hour days to stabilize operations. When Ethan called to check in, Chen's voice carried exhaustion, but also something that might have been pride. "The team's rallying. They're angry about what happened to you, scared about what it means for jobs. But they're also proud. Turns out standing up to criminals plays well with employees who felt invisible their whole careers. We're getting applications from top talent who want to work for a company with actual values. Stock will recover. We just need to survive the short term. The words helped, not enough to erase worry, but enough to remind Ethan that the fight was worth having. On the third night, Claire found him standing at the window overlooking a garden bathed in security lighting. She moved to stand beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Lily's asleep, finally." She asked when we could go home. "What did you tell her?" "Soon, that Daddy's doing something really important and we just have to be patient." Ethan turned to face her fully, seeing exhaustion written in every line of her features, but also strength that hadn't been there 3 days ago in his bathroom. "When this is over, when the arrests happen and the trial starts and you're not in immediate danger anymore, what do you want? Really want not just survival but life beyond this?" Claire considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I want my name cleared. Want to work again as something other than a fugitive or a victim. Want to wake up without checking over my shoulder. Want to take Lily to a park without worrying that someone's going to attack us." She reached up and touched his face, fingers gentle. "And I want to see if this thing between us can survive normal life. Because right now everything's extreme. Life and death, crisis and adrenaline. We barely know each other outside of trauma. I need to know if what I feel is real or just survival instinct latching onto the nearest source of safety." Her honesty cut through any platitudes Ethan might have offered. He covered her hand with his. "Then we take it slow. We survive this crisis. We let you rebuild. We give ourselves time to figure out what's real and what's just us clinging to each other in a storm. And if it turns out to be real, then we figure out what comes next. Together, one step at a time. No rushing into anything that isn't built on solid ground." Claire smiled, and it reached her eyes for the first time since he'd known her. "I can work with that." The arrest began on a Wednesday morning at 7 a.m. Federal agents executed warrants simultaneously across 12 locations, taking down Robert Marsh at his home, 4 TechCorp executives at their offices, and 6 associates connected to the money laundering operation at various locations throughout the Pacific Northwest. Chen called Ethan at 7:15 with updates delivered in clipped professional tones. "Marsh is in custody, no bail given, flight risk and severity of charges. His lawyers are already filing motions, but the evidence is too solid. We've frozen his assets, seized company records, and 3 of his associates are already negotiating plea deals in exchange for testimony. It's over. You won. You and Ms. Bennett took down one of the biggest fraud operations we've seen in years." The news should have felt like victory. Instead, Ethan felt drained, emptied of emotion by days of sustained crisis. Beside him, Claire listened on speakerphone, her expression cycling through relief and disbelief and something too complex to name. "What happens now?" "You're free to go. Protection detail will remain in place until the trial, but you can return to normal life. Marsh's ability to hurt you died the moment we put handcuffs on him. The people he hired only care about money, and frozen assets means no payment. They've already scattered." Normal life. The concept felt foreign. They left protective custody that afternoon, returning to the penthouse that felt simultaneously familiar and alien. Someone had repaired the shot-out window at the cabin. The Tesla had been serviced and returned to the parking garage with new brake lines. Life had continued in their absence, the world spinning on while they existed in suspended animation. Lily ran from room to room, reacquainting herself with toys and spaces, her laughter echoing through halls that had been silent for days. Claire stood in the guest bedroom doorway with an expression that suggested she was calculating how long hospitality lasted before it became imposition. Ethan found her there an hour later, staring at the bed she'd slept in for one night before everything exploded. "You don't have to leave. Not until you're ready. Not until you've figured out what comes next. I need to find a place of my own. Start rebuilding independence. I can't just live here indefinitely as your charity case." "You're not a charity case. You're—" He stopped, unsure how to finish the sentence. She was what exactly? Too complicated to reduce to simple labels. Claire's smile was shade and understanding. "I'm someone who needs to prove I can stand on my own before I can be part of anything else. Let me do this my way, Ethan. Let me rebuild with dignity instead of dependence." 6 months later, Winter gave way to early spring in Portland, rain softening to drizzle and bulbs pushing green through earth that had been frozen. The trial had started, installed, and restarted. Legal maneuvering creating delays that frustrated prosecutors but couldn't change the inevitable outcome. Marsh's lawyers were good, but evidence didn't care about legal gymnastics. Coal Logistics had survived the crisis, stock recovering as Chen predicted, new contracts replacing the old ones. The company's reputation for ethical business actually strengthened by the very scandal that should have destroyed it. Pemberton and the directors who'd resigned had been replaced by people who understood that principles mattered, that being the kind of company employees were proud to work for created value that quarterly reports couldn't capture. Ethan had stepped back from 18-hour days, hiring a COO to handle operations while he focused on strategy and the parts of the business he actually enjoyed. He picked Lily up from school 3 days a week. He made dinner most nights. He learned to be present instead of just proximate. Claire had found work at a nonprofit called Ethics Watch, an organization that supported corporate whistleblowers and helped expose fraud. Her executive skills translated seamlessly, and within 3 months she'd been promoted to director of operations. She'd rented an apartment in a neighborhood that felt safe without being sterile, close enough to the penthouse that Lily could visit but far enough to establish independence. They dated slowly. Dinners where conversation flowed easy, walks through parks where Lily ran ahead chasing pigeons, movies where they held hands in darkness and remembered that life existed beyond crisis. The intimacy built gradually, layers of understanding accumulating until the foundation felt solid enough to support weight. There had been setbacks, Claire waking from nightmares about being homeless, the trauma rising when she least expected it, Ethan struggling with guilt about employees who'd suffered during the stock collapse, the weight of leadership heavier than he'd anticipated. Moments where the gap between who they were and what they'd been through felt too wide to bridge. But they kept showing up, kept choosing each other, kept building something real from the wreckage of catastrophe. On a Saturday morning in March, Ethan stood in his penthouse kitchen making breakfast while Lily set the table with concentrated focus. Claire was due to arrive in 10 minutes for their standing weekend brunch, a tradition that had evolved organically from convenience to cornerstone. The doorbell rang. Lily ran to answer it, throwing herself at Claire with the enthusiasm of someone who hadn't seen her in days instead of 48 hours. Claire laughed and caught her, spinning the child in a circle before setting her down and ruffling her hair. She met Ethan's eyes across the kitchen, and something passed between them that no longer needed words. Recognition. Affection. The certainty that whatever they were building, it mattered. They ate scrambled eggs and toast while Lily narrated a complicated story about playground politics, her worldview expanding to include dramas that seemed impossibly important to someone 6 years old. Claire listened with attention that never wavered, asking questions that showed she understood how seriously children took their social ecosystems. After breakfast, Lily disappeared to her room to play, and Ethan and Claire found themselves alone in the living room with coffee and comfortable silence. Claire broke it first, her voice carrying weight. The prosecutor called yesterday. Marsh's final appeal was denied. Sentencing is scheduled for next month. They're projecting 15 to 20 years minimum. Justice delivered in bureaucratic language and prison terms. It should have felt like closure. Instead, it felt like an ending to a chapter neither of them wanted to keep rereading. How do you feel about it? Claire considered the question, her fingers wrapped around her coffee mug. Vindicated, relieved, sad that it took losing everything to get people to listen, angry that the system protects people like Marsh until the evidence becomes too overwhelming to ignore. She looked at him directly, but mostly grateful, because if I hadn't lost everything, I wouldn't have ended up in your bathroom looking like a drowned rat. I wouldn't have met Lily. I wouldn't have found you. The words hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Ethan set down his coffee and moved to sit beside her on the couch. I've been thinking about something you said in protective custody, about not knowing if what we felt was real or just survival instinct. I remember. 6 months is long enough to answer that question. Long enough to see each other in normal circumstances. Long enough to know this isn't just trauma bonding. His hand found hers, fingers interlacing with the ease of practice. I'm in love with you, Claire. Not because you needed rescuing, not because we survived something terrible together, but because of who you are when life is calm, because of how you laugh at Lily's terrible jokes, because of the way you organize chaos into sense, because you make me want to be better than I knew how to be. Claire's breath caught, her eyes bright with emotion that she didn't try to hide. I love you too, and it terrifies me, because everyone I've cared about has been hurt or has left, but I'm done letting fear make my decisions. I choose this. I choose you. I choose us. When the kiss was different from the desperate collision at the cabin. Slower, deliberate, a promise instead of a plea. When they pulled apart, Claire was smiling through tears. I should probably mention that my lease is up next month. You should probably mention what you're planning to do about that. I was thinking maybe I don't renew. Maybe I find somewhere that feels more like home. Ethan's heart stuttered. Any ideas where that might be? Claire gestured around the penthouse at the space that had transformed from sterile luxury to something warmer over the past 6 months. This place used to feel cold, like a hotel, but now when I walk in, Lily's drawings are on the refrigerator. Your boots are by the door. It smells like coffee and home. And I realize something. Home isn't a place. It's people. It's you and Lily and the life we're building together. Through the bedroom door, Lily's voice called out, asking if Claire wanted to see the castle she'd built from blocks. Claire called back that she'd be right there, her attention still on Ethan. If I moved in, it wouldn't be because I need rescue. It would be because I choose partnership. Because I want to wake up next to you. Because I want to be part of Lily's life every day instead of just weekends. Because I'm ready to stop being careful and start being brave. Ethan pulled her close, breathing in the reality of her presence, solid and warm and choosing to stay. Then move in, build a life here. Let's stop pretending we're not already family and make it official. Lily appeared in the doorway, blocks forgotten, her expressions cycling through surprise and excitement. Claire's moving in? For real? Forever? Claire looked at the child who'd offered her a towel when she had nothing, who'd held her hand through terror, who'd helped her remember that compassion existed even in the darkest moments. For real. If you'll have me. Lily launched herself at them both, wrapping small arms around their necks, her laughter bright and uncomplicated. They held her between them, this accidental family forged in crisis and cemented in choice, and Ethan felt something settle in his chest that had been restless for years. Through the windows, Portland stretched out under spring rain, the city that had witnessed their collapse and their rebuilding. Somewhere in that sprawl, Marsh sat in a cell awaiting sentencing. Somewhere, life continued for the 500 employees who depended on coal logistics. Somewhere, the world spun on with its usual chaos and beauty. But here, in this moment, there was only warmth and laughter and the promise of tomorrow. Lily wiggled free and ran back to her room, calling for them to come see the castle that wouldn't wait. Claire stood and held out her hand to Ethan, pulling him up from the couch. Ready for the rest of our lives? He thought about the man who'd found a stranger in his bathroom 3 days before Christmas. Thought about the choice to help instead of calling security. Thought about every decision since then that had led to this moment. The hardest choices rarely felt easy in the moment. But standing here with Claire's hand in his and Lily's laughter echoing through the penthouse, Ethan knew that some risks were worth taking. Some fights were worth having. Some people were worth believing in even when logic suggested otherwise. Sometimes rescue was mutual. Sometimes the person you saved ended up saving you right back. Sometimes the best things in life came wrapped in crisis and terror and required faith that something good could grow from catastrophe. They walked toward Lily's room together, and through the window, the rain began to clear.